The first step to overcoming adversity is overcoming our belief. And to do that, we need to learn to ask the right questions. When I lost my son, I had difficulty reconciling everything that I thought I knew about God with what I was actually experiencing in my life. But I was afraid to ask these questions out loud. It felt disrespectful. It felt like God would be angry with me if I were to actually voice what I was thinking in my head out loud. If you have ever had a compost bucket under your sink, think about what happens when you don't take that out on a regular basis. It starts to stink, right? And that's what happens when we don't take out the trash in our lives, in our hearts and minds. Our lives start to stink, and it colors the way that we see everything else that's going on, and that's exactly what happened to me. So to encourage you that it is okay to ask God questions that you have in your heart, I want to share with you a couple of Psalms. From the first 2 verses of Psalm 22, David says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out to you by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. Also in Psalm 13, David again says, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemies triumph over me? These are just a couple of examples of these types of psalms of lament, which are a great model for our own prayers as we voice our doubts and concerns and questions to God. If God has included these in his holy word, then obviously he is not offended when we ask him these questions. I guarantee you that you cannot ask God a question that he hasn't been asked before. And there's no way that you can come up with a question that he doesn't already have an answer for. We see David, the mighty warrior, the man after God's own heart, the one who slew Goliath. But obviously there were times in his life when he felt defeated too. When he says, how long, Lord, will you let my enemies triumph over me? And even the other psalm was quoted by Jesus when he was on the cross of, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even Jesus asked the question why in his hour of suffering. So it's okay for us to bring our questions to God. When we are going through a period of adversity, the most common question that we ask is why? Why me? Why this? Why now? And God is okay with us asking those questions. Very briefly, there are 4 reasons why we tend to suffer as human beings. The first one is sometimes we suffer just because of our own poor choices. There's a lot of adversity that we simply bring upon ourselves because we made a bad decision. Secondly, sometimes we suffer because of the sin of someone else. Someone else has done something wrong against us, and that causes pain in our lives. Thirdly, there are some suffering that is brought on just by the natural consequences of living in a fallen world. There are natural disasters, there's sickness and disease, there are injuries and accidents, and things that happen just by nature of the world that we live in. And fourth, and maybe most difficult to bear, is sometimes we suffer because we have obeyed God. And I don't have time to unpack all that right now here, but there is more about that in my book, Undefeated, if you want to read about that there. Now, God's totally okay with us asking why and asking these real and raw questions, but I think that we are better served if we learn to ask better questions, like what and how. For instance, we could say, what, Lord, what do you want me to learn from this situation? What is it you're trying to teach me? We can ask God, how? How can I serve you? How can I glorify you in this difficulty? How can I reach out with a heart of compassion to others? How can I show your faithfulness to others with the way that I handle this trial? Asking whatever questions that we have in our heart, however they come out, is important, and it is acceptable to God. It is not blasphemous to bring our concerns to him. But I think once we get through those initial questions, asking these other questions, which I call the right questions, are more what leads us to overcome that adversity and not stay in that place of self-pity and wallowing in those questions. If we're going to ask why in the face of our adversity, another good question is to say, why not? If Jesus suffered for his obedience and for what he's done for me in my life, why not me? The Bible says that we should not be surprised when we face trials of many kinds, but that is expected. That is part of living a Christian life here on this world, is that we will experience trials and tragedies. We know that God can be trusted in any situation, even when it doesn't make sense or we don't understand. When you're struggling with the adversity that you're going through, by all means, ask God your questions honestly and openly. but also remember to ask the right questions.